you were immediately drawn right in then.
Completely. He was just so, he was discovering himself for the first time as the full being that he is and was. And so his delight in his own radiance was new. And so it was a special time because he was so, like I think the night I got there, or perhaps it was the next night, it was the first time that there was a talk, he read the Mummery for the first time to all of us. We partied, there were all these wild scenes. We would sing to him. We were singing John Denver songs and Godspell, to see thee more clearly, follow thee more nearly, that kind of stuff. Just, we were adoring him. It was a love fest. He was romancing us all. We were in love with him. He was so radiant, so beautiful. He was 34.
Right.
And he was just so sweet. We would embrace him. Every night we'd hug. It was a wonderful, wonderful time to come. I was just drawn right in and immediately, really, almost began to be suffused by the living force, the bright spiritual energy that he was radiating.
So I want to bring this time into a larger focus for a lot of the people who only see it from a kind of an outside point of view, but his participation with his devotees at that time was, as you said, as a discovery for him also on how to work with individuals with basically very little or no orientation to being with a spiritual master, because we have no cultural background or even any orientation how to work with or be with a spiritual master. So it was a rather, as Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's period of time at 73, 74, was a very experimental period of time for any spiritual master entering into this culture with what was going on with drugs and all various other stuff.
Well, during those years, all we drank with, during those months, all we drank with Bubba were beer. Now, I was completely confused. His very first words to me were, "Would you like a beer?" And perhaps it wasn't auspicious, I don't know, but I had just been very religiously following this very specific series of guidelines about diet that I had been sent as a corresponding student, such that you weren't even supposed to cook in aluminum pans. There were all these guidelines, and the ashram had already impressed me just as I entered it. They combed the carpets and everything was just so served and conscious and gorgeous, and it really was like a puja was done on the whole place, and it really shined. And so I heard that and I wondered, like, is this a test? Or, I didn't even quite know what to make of it. So I just kind of stood there kind of, I didn't know if I should say, yes, I wanted a beer. I actually wasn't much of a beer drinker as it happened, so I wasn't like, yeah, I really want a beer.
Right.
If that's what you want me to do, sure. And Pat Morley said, maybe you should start with some some prasad grapefruit, and she handed it to me. That was my first exchange, and he seemed to bless that.
And so then, as this period continued, which was lasted for how long?
That was a very short period of time. It looms large in my consciousness because so much was happening for me in terms of the Guru Yoga being initiated and my own life force being transformed. A lot happened every single day. It was a dramatic and intense period of time. But I think we purchased Persimmon and moved up there with him in mid-February.
Right.
I probably wasn't living in Los Angeles more than 5 or 6 weeks. it was a whole chapter of my relationship with him, but it was short.
And out of that period, then came the book,
Yes.
Garbage in the Gun.
Well, what happened? I was very, very willing to do whatever I could do to be around him, as we all were. I mean, this was the riddle of that whole time. Being around him was so fun. It was just so blissful. The intoxicating quality of the delight that everybody felt in his company was blowing our minds so much that we would do anything to be around him. And unfortunately, that's the behavior of an addict. You'll do anything for the thing that gives you the hit. And so luckily we were still in an innocent time, but later on, a year or more later, the kind of confused and immature behavior that went on around him became, kind of got in the way.
Right,
at a later point in time.
And I believe after the 74 period of time, he actually pulled back and started the Way of Divine Communion. So there was this whole period of formation of his community and how he was...
When I came to him, the whole way, was the way of understanding.
Right.
That was the way I was drawn in. We practiced Guru devotion, absolutely, and we meditated on him. The method of the siddhas was a relationship. So communion and the relationship with the Guru Yoga was central right from the beginning. But the practice had to do with awakening. Right. It had to do with radical recognition and self-observation, recognition, radical intuition. Those were the stages of the process we were studying. We were inquiring, avoiding relationship. Now, early on, because I'd do anything to be around him, I was moved to Persimmon as a construction worker, and I didn't have much experience. I had little. I'd done some construction work. I advertised one, summer job I'd had as a construction worker enough, and managed to get moved on up, and I worked for it could have only been a month or two. I ran the crew that built what was called Parker House. It was this, later the seminary in Clear Lake Highlands. We erected a big structure there, and we ran Neil's business out of it, Neil Panico's business. So I did run that crew for a little while, but basically it was all, like, we did whatever we had to do to, with total enthusiasm, massive energy. Like, we served hard, we worked hard, we gave our all every minute of the day, 100%. But then we would get to be with him. We sat with him in what's now called Temple Eleutherius. It was the satsang hall in those days, pretty much every day. we would sit with him in the evening. He would just, and the quality of his transmission. And every weekend, everybody would come up from San Francisco. The whole community that couldn't live at the land I was lucky enough to be living there right from the beginning would come up, and that's when we'd really mix it up with him even more intensely. But even during the week, he'd sit with us. So he invited me and Samuel Bonder to become his editors, and it was his first editors. And this was a profoundly initiatory process. We were in the baths, naked, hanging out with him. And I had given him a book I had published, this fellow, Andre Codrescu, had published a book of my prose poems that was called Je suis Rimbaud. And I had shared it with Beloved, and it was a kind of, it was imaginative gymnastics. What I'd done was, it was very playful, and it was kind of very postmodern. He had written his master's degree on Gertrude Stein, and so he was hip to that. Now, Samuel was a school teacher and kind of a scholar, and he'd been very very profoundly initiated by Ramana. And so he was kind of a substantial person. And even though Bubba, I'll just use the name I knew him by at the time, had worked before with Nina and a little bit with some others, but Nina primarily, just really as kind of a copy editor, a proofreader. You know, that was insofar as there had been any editorial functions, it had really been mainly Nina. He was for the first time asking us to be his editors and to document what was happening, because I think this took place a few days after the Saturday Night Massacre and the kind of formal initiation, because he proclaimed at that point, by this Guru Day, I will have performed my last miracles and offered my final spiritual instructions, and you will see it. It was very much a Babe Ruth point at the bleachers kind of a process where he said, this Guru Day will be remarkable, mark my words.
So we're talking July 74.
That was, and so he made that prediction in March of 74. So the heart of the Garbage and the Goddess period was just a few months.
Right.
So within a week, I suppose, maybe even a day or so, it was almost right away after the Saturday Night Massacre, he asked Samuel and me to be his first editors. And it was informal and playful, but it was profound. And I was just so honored, and and I took anything he said very much to heart, very seriously. And he said, your job is to make satsang available. And that really became a defining initiation. He had asked me to be a bridge between him and the world. And that bridging process, which initially just seemed like a joyous celebration, only fun, only thank you so much, Lord. What else could I want more? Has really shaped my whole life. Because increasingly, this is the story according to Terry. Not everyone would tell it this way, but increasingly he made choices that made him less and less easily understood by the broad mass of human beings. Because he would not compromise with Narcissus, because he did things on his own terms, because the pictures of himself, like the picture on the cover of the Method of the Siddhas even, the picture on the cover of the Knee of Listening, he looks very beautiful and attractive. That's an accessible picture, even though it has a very profound teaching point. But then he would go to these very transmissive photographs of himself that were not so inviting, that required, he looked kind of weird on the cover of the Method. It was like you had to have an esoteric perception in order to grasp it. Well, in my telling of the story, all the way across the years of the teaching demonstration, he increasingly refused to compromise with the common mind of the time. And what it would take to build a bridge to him became a more and more formidable task.